Friends, top news. The Druzhba oil pipeline has been blown up again in Russia. It's blazing, burning very brightly, gorgeous video. But December 3rd brought Russia a new night of chaos. Moscow and the Moscow region were plunged into a blackout.
Yes, the car has no lights. No, something is burning in one window. And here there is not a single one at all. I don't understand a damn thing.
Dozens of buildings were left without electricity, heat, and water. People are complaining en masse that elevators have stopped and electronics aren't working. At the same time, Chechnya also came under attack. For the second time in the past week, Akhmat facilities have been attacked. The FSB building in Achkhoy-Martan is on fire. Explosions can be heard throughout the entire district. Kadyrov is in a panic. Aviation navigation is recording drone attacks in the south. In occupied Crimea, in Krasnodar Krai, and near Oryol, there thermal power plants and oil refineries are on fire. At night, friendly drones turned oil depots near Tambov and in Voronezh into blazing torches. Russia once again cannot maintain control over its energy sector or its skies. Let's discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Lvovich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, the Druzhba oil pipeline has been blown up. Ukrainian special services are credited with the operation. What do you think?
Yes, this is a branch of the Druzhba oil pipeline, the one that runs from near Lipetsk towards Taganrog. So it's not the main pipeline, that's important to understand, but the operation was carried out just as we discussed before, namely how to stop Russia's oil industry, blowing up the pipeline by direct contact. In this case, if the GUR took it on, at least according to the information available in open sources, it used an explosive device, a bomb that was triggered from a certain distance. And they accomplished this combat mission, stopping or at least damaging one of the branches of this oil pipeline. Just like that, if the whole world joined in, everyone who cares, all at once, to cover these pipelines across 18 million square kilometers in Russia. Even with the National Guard, they wouldn't be able to block it off. In principle, it would be possible to stop the Russian economy by blowing up these pipelines and gas pipelines, and then to break up the Russian Federation itself, precisely through the collapse that would follow the shutdown of the Russian economy. Let's wait. In principle, we talk about it first, and then a year later, it happens over the course of a year. This effect will already start to gain a certain momentum. There is a certain synergy effect, an accumulation, and then we will be talking about stopping the Russian economy, including through the efforts of those who care.
Roman Nikolaevich, we strike the oil pipeline here and there, but we can't deliver a massive blow like, say, 5 to 6 explosions in a month. Why can't we manage that?
Well, first of all, our special services, which are currently focused, after all, on their work. The main assets for long-range reconnaissance, the security service, the main intelligence directorate, and the special operations forces are actually engaged in airstrikes. In reality, of course, this is the task of the Air Force. So it's simply a matter of allocating certain funding and resources so that the Air Force can carry out long-range strikes. But in reality, intelligence should be focused specifically on operations directly targeting the pipelines, using such mechanisms, that is, involving their own groups. With the help of concerned informants, partisans, in other words, by creating certain opportunities, we can do it. But for now, we just don't have enough for everything. And when we actually started working, we really only began in August of this year. Before that, it was just destruction. Ukrainians call it in the trench on Ivan, but in reality, of course, only after strikes on Russian rear positions can you create serious problems for the enemy. I think that's like 3 more Armenias.
In December, they wrote that several districts went dark at once, and there is video footage. Again, it's hard to verify that this is the Moscow region, but that's what the Telegram channels are saying. Dozens of homes were left without power, heating was lost, there was no hot water, and household appliances stopped working. Naturally, people in Moscow and the Moscow region are already panicking. What do you think?
Once again, our generals are at least concerned about the health of the Russian population. As we've already mentioned, they destroyed bromine, iodinated bromine. In other words, in order to raise libido has dropped too low, as far as I understand, because Russian women were asking for it. Well, naturally, without electricity, people will have to walk up certain floors by foot, and that's exactly the point. Climbing stairs actually provides a significant benefit for the heart, since your legs work as a pump for the blood. And this is how we'll improve the health of the Russian nation. In the end, maybe through their legs, it will finally reach their brains that it's better to stop fighting. But of course, it would be best to return everything to how it was and restore what was lost. Well, we'll be working on that. And naturally, Moscow is one of our main targets. Why? Because it's the metropolis. That is, all the resources are concentrated in Moscow. The administration of the Russian Empire is concentrated in Moscow. And if you turn off Moscow like this, once, twice, eventually maybe it will get through to their brains or whatever is left of their brains. Although with a 15-centimeter thick frontal bone and then just 1 centimeter of brain left at the back of the head, it's not much. But still, maybe at least that 1 centimeter will get the message that killing people is wrong.
Roman Igorovich, Chechnya. It's interesting. It turns out that in the last 10 days, there have been 2 strikes. So, the second strike by the armed forces of Ukraine in a week, an FSB building was blown up, security forces were attacked. Ramzan Kadyrov's people, they write that after the blackout in the Moscow region, the night continued with heavy attacks on Chechnya. This is already the second strike by the armed forces of Ukraine on the Republic, Kadyrov's in the past week. Last time, the center of Grozny burned, there was a detonation, a destroyed Interior Ministry military compound, and the Akhmat Sever barracks were blown up. And here comes the next strike. 2 targets were attacked. The location of Akhmat security forces in Gudermes and the FSB building in Achkhoy-Martan. According to the FSB, there was a direct hit, the building was blown up, and a powerful fire broke out inside. There are images, photos, and videos. What do you say, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, Kadyrov's troops who are holding Kadyraya, Pasha, Chechnya, this is the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. It will rise from the ashes after the Russians, Muscovites at the time, if anyone remembers, signed a peace treaty in 1997. The very one our authorities have been running around with like a fool with a mortar for years now, the 4th year since Istanbul. A similar peace treaty was signed in 1997 in Chechnya, with Chechnya, between the Muscovites and the Chechens, again, the Republic of Ichkeria. And what happened 3 years later? 3 years later, the Russians gathered their forces and resources and flattened Grozny to the ground. Thousands died then. Thousands of Chechens were killed. It was during that very war. So that's what a piece of paper signed by the Muscovites is worth. Naturally, the people of Ichkeria, to put it mildly, have some grievances against the Muscovites. And we will also help to address those grievances because we have our own grievances as well against the Muscovites in this sense. And what, for example, is the FSB? It's precisely one of the mechanisms Muscovites use to control their colonies. So right now, Kadyrov's forces, again, the same Rosgvardia under Kadyrov, that's also one of the mechanisms for controlling the republic. Ichkeria, the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, by the Mongols, by the Muscovites. I think that's exactly it. The actions our defense forces are taking right now are also targeting these very mechanisms of control. Basically, the occupation authorities. These are occupation authorities, occupation mechanisms that are currently keeping Ichkeria in a colonial state. Well, again, it's Moscow's doing. We will help. Well, I think that in due time, our Chechen brothers will help us level Moscow to the ground. Because for Grozny, for Bakhmut, for Pokrovsk, for Mariupol, Moscow should be at most knee-high. Well, the remains of Moscow at least. The Chechens will help with this. The fierce ones, they will help.
Roman Grigorievich, but from a military point of view, as I understand it, even the armed forces of Ukraine are acting this way. I noticed that for a very long time we didn't attack, but for some reason now there have been literally 2 strikes, so to speak, in the last 7 to 10 days.
They found a way through, that is, they broke through the corridors. By the way, earlier we discussed with you how our special services are destroying Russian radars, surface-to-air missile systems. So they break open corridors and then drones are sent through these corridors. The range of the drones allows them to reach the northeastern Caucasus, almost the entire North Caucasus. From Dagestan, as we discussed before, remember the diesel plant was Heat, the one that also produces torpedoes for submarines. That's already the Caspian region. So practically the entire North Caucasus is now within our reach for strikes. The question is how many of those drones will be sent in this direction. I think naturally it's a military target. Once again, I'll repeat, this is our contribution to the liberation of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. In other words, our contribution to the destruction of these occupation authorities and the Kadyrov regime, and of course the FSB as well.
At night, friendly drones attacked oil depots near Tambov and Voronezh. Some say oil depots, while others say oil refineries. Roman Igorevich, let's discuss this.
Well, these are oil depots, really. In other words, these are tanks with light petroleum products, which can now basically be targeted. After we started about 3 to 4 months ago, we've been targeting oil refining, oil transshipment, in other words, oil complexes, Russian ones, and now it's possible to reach oil depots as well, just not in the reverse order like it was last year. They forgot about oil refining and started setting oil depots on fire. What's the point if oil refining still exists? But if there's no oil refining, then you need to go after the fuel, including at the oil depots. That's exactly what our Ukrainian defense forces are doing right now. This means that we now have enough drones to be able to use them for this purpose, including barrels of fuel and not just oil refining.
Also, everyone is writing about the explosions in occupied Crimea, Feodosia. Roman Nikolaevich, what could have been attacked in occupied Crimea during these 24 hours?
Well, first of all, they're finishing off the piers of this oil depot, which, by the way, is the main oil depot in Crimea in the Feodosia Bay. This is one of the non-freezing bays, which is why the Russians use it for transshipment of oil products. And Feodosia itself, there are anti-aircraft missile systems and radars located there. These are the radio technical troops of the Russian Federation who cover the direction toward the Kerch Bridge, and actually also toward Novorossiysk, among others. So in general, this is the southeastern direction. That's why there's plenty to target in Feodosia. At the very least, and let's not forget Feodosia itself, there are quite a few enterprises there that service the fleet, the Russian fleet included.
Explosions in Tuapse. That's a port, Roman Grigorievich.
Yes, it's a port. Of course, the Tuapse oil refinery. The port is finishing off the infrastructure that can handle oil products. And the Tuapse oil refinery, which is located practically on the coast, as well as 2 or 3 other plants there that transfer and pump, including oil products for shipment through the Tuapse port. But of course, the traffic there is much lower than, for example, in Novorossiysk. So for us, the main one is, of course, Novorossiysk.
They are reporting strikes in the Krasnodar region, recording hits on a number of energy facilities there. What could this be?
Well, there were strikes on both the Ilsky and the Finnish refineries, so there were strikes in parallel over several days, plus energy generation facilities, mainly in order to halt Russian railway logistics. They are now pulling in their last strategic reserves to the Eastern Front. And for us, of course, it's important to finish off and stop this entire flow. And we shouldn't forget that they've also started to seriously target the Berev Aviation Company, which operates the Tu-95 MS aircraft, the ones that carry the Kh-101 missiles, some of the main threats for us. And there are also the A-50, A-60, A-100, so there's a whole range there. These are either strategic bombers or other types of Russian aviation that are definitely targeted for destruction, so this direction is very important for us. Also, there's Ruk and Roskosti.
There's a good video about that too. Confirmation from the Oriel region. Reports indicate fires at energy and fuel facilities. An oil refinery is burning in Oriel, where emergency services have worked for 2 days. Firefighting is complicated because oil depots and a phosphate fertilizer plant also caught fire. So, many sites in Oriol and the Oriol region are affected. What do you think?
This is the direction toward Moscow. That is Oriel itself, along the highway. Kursk Moscow is located there, and the Oriol region is between the Kursk and Bryansk regions in the direction of the extremely frightened idiots heading to Moscow. And the idiots are already scared, as far as I understand, since some are already walking up to the 10th floor on foot, and some even to the 24th because there's no electricity in certain places. And ahead, there are still some serious gifts coming for New Year's, especially for Muscovites, that's for sure. Our special services have prepared them, our Ukrainian defense forces. So one of the technological corridors to Moscow, that's precisely Oriol. That's why it's important for us to destroy all the energy infrastructure located there, plus everything related to the oil industry. Oil refineries are the same basis from which, in principle, the same Muscovites can suck out every last drop of fuel when they run out. Why? Because work on technological corridors continues. Ryazan. This is the southeastern direction, the eastern direction, well, the southern Oriol too.
Black Sea. Another Russian tanker under attack. A serious incident occurred in the Black Sea. The Mid-Volga 2 tanker, which was traveling from Russia to Georgia, was carrying sunflower oil. It was attacked about 80 miles off the Turkish coast. The vessel was damaged. As I understand it, this is actually the 3rd tanker because the others were on their way. Either from Novorossiysk or to Novorossiysk, they were attacked. There were massive explosions. The footage was insane. Roman Igorevich, the floor is yours.
At the very least, our foreign ministry said it wasn't me and it's not my place, because we can't say anything directly. We can only hint. Everything the Russians have floating out there, it's mostly Russian, and there are decent sailors on board. Everything the Russians have at sea should be damaged, sunk, or stopped. All this allows the Russian economy to earn foreign currency, which is then used to put these feeble, dying ones back into service. At least that's what they think. By the way, they're dying quite well, and on our territory too. On the theater of military operations, they buy and produce equipment and ammunition. That's why any energy related, or rather any economic target, should be destroyed by our means of attack at various levels. Again, by our, I mean this in a very broad sense right now, starting directly with our own operations and ending with the efforts of those who care and help us. So if our foreign ministry says that Budanov is there, he wasn't there even though his robe was hanging there. So that's exactly how it should be confirmed. It wasn't us.
News. In Turkey, the largest oil carrier has refused to work with Russia after the tanker explosion. The Turkish shipping company Besiktas Shipping, which owns the Mersin tanker damaged off the coast of Senegal, has announced it is ceasing all operations with Russia due to extremely high security risks. Last week, the oil tanker Mersin was hit by 4 external explosions while anchored near Dakar. That's the reaction, and everyone is saying that other companies will follow suit. Roman Grigorievich.
Just imagine what cynicism from Turkish business. So they don't want to take part in killing Ukrainians. It turns out they don't want to lose business either. Well, to put it mildly, or rather, let's be blunt, they're scum after all. They shouldn't have been involved in the first place. Since 2014, ever since the Russians started killing Ukrainians, the Turks shouldn't have been doing business with Russia. In fact, no one should have been involved at all. And now it turns out it's not about the 500,000 lives that have been lost, including with the help of the Turks, this so-called business, because they were helping the Russians, either by playing along with them or, for example, by creating certain financial flows for the Russians. It's not the 500,000 lives, so to speak, that stops them, but the business they might lose. Yeah, and to hell with it all. This so-called Turkish business, if it enables the Russian army to kill Ukrainians, in other words, it's not the deaths of our children, whom we bury almost every other day, that at least stops the Turks and all the other so-called business people from cooperating with Russia, but rather the possibility of losing their tankers and their cargo ships. Well, then it means we need to keep sinking them. And that means everyone involved, even those who were involved before. Why? Because they took part in the killing of our people. And who is going to forgive them just like that? I think the main intelligence directorate, the security service, our so-called Ukrainian Mossad, again, although Mossad is a bit of a stretch, our special services will continue the liquidation operation, which should target all companies, all of them, I repeat, companies that since 2014 have been involved in the Russian economy, that together with Russians have been making money for them, if not now, then later. All these companies will eventually end up in contact with Russian Moscow at the bottom of the Black Sea or somewhere else if they get intercepted in any other part of the ocean.
Statistics on the scale have appeared. So, a record for oil refineries in November. Bloomberg published data that is devastating for the Russian oil industry. November set a record for strikes by Ukraine's armed forces on oil refineries. At least 14 attacks on refineries, but I understood it as 14 attacks on different refineries. 4 strikes on oil storage facilities in ports, export delays in Novorossiysk, and an attack on 2 sanctioned tankers near the Bosphorus. Damage to the Afipsky and Orsk oil refineries. Russia's daily oil refining has dropped to 5 million barrels. The consequences are significant. Restoring the oil industry takes months, sometimes even years. And each new strike disrupts logistics even further, writes Bloomberg. What do you think?
What I'll say is that this should have been done last year when they started doing it and then stopped in May of last year. So everyone involved in stopping the strikes is responsible. For the Russian oil industry last year in May and in March of this year, they should be prosecuted under Article 111 for treason. In Ukraine, that's the minimum. It's unfortunate that we don't have a death penalty statute, meaning there's no punishment by execution. In fact, during wartime, actions like these should be punishable by execution. And that includes those who gave the orders, these so-called kings, Midoses, Alibabas, or their 40 thieves, the Mindiches, the Zuckermans, and all the other Kaganoviches, with Israeli passports in their pockets, who were stopping the work of our generals, our defense forces targeting Russian oil facilities. This started last year, and they were working well until May of last year, and then they stopped. In March of this year, they stopped again, but at the beginning of this year, they started working again. Only in August did they start, or rather resume. This is the so-called third round. That's why it's not just the Flamandichki who should be executed. Those generals who were kissing those Flamandichki's asses should be executed too. The ones who were carrying out those illegal orders, the question is, why are they doing this? And for what reward? For how many shekels? Our generals sold out to these Flamandichki, which is why since last year they haven't been destroying things the way Russian military targets are being destroyed now. And not all of them, by the way. The Druzhba pipeline is still pumping. Just because they hit a branch of the Druzhba pipeline toward Taganrog doesn't mean they've stopped Druzhba. Druzhba pumps 300,000 barrels of oil per day. At $60 a barrel, that's $18 million a day. That's how much money the Russian treasury is getting. And still, our generals once again are kissing someone's ass. Again, for what? For your shekels or whatever. Someone is benefiting from this.
Roman Igorovich, I don't understand why Bild is spreading this information, but today, so to speak, all the Telegram channels have shared it. Of course, the General Staff officially denies this information, but I would like you to officially confirm that as well. And again, why is Bild spreading this? Russia has completely captured Pokrovsk, bringing to an end an operation that lasted almost a year. That's a quote from Bild. The publication notes that now the city could become a springboard for further Russian advances westward toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. Full control over Pokrovsk also allows Moscow to cut off Ukrainian logistical routes to the neighboring city of Mirnohrad, which is still partially held by the armed forces of Ukraine. However, as the publication notes, the capture of Pokrovsk is unlikely to have a major impact on the war for the rest of Donbass. The two major cities remaining here under Ukrainian control, Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, are 50 kilometers away, and the battle for them has not yet begun. End of quote. As I understand it, at first the General Staff wrote that they would not comment on the information, and then they issued a denial. What do you think?
South of the railway in Pokrovsk, the Russians are indeed positioned north of these tracks. Our troops are holding the line. Right now, you could say the front line runs exactly along this railway. Both sides are sending out sabotage groups trying to probe the enemy. But this is mostly a gray zone, so from the point of view of saying that either side has captured Pokrovsk, that's not the case. They're just not fully aware of the situation. Right now, Pokrovsk, given the capabilities of both sides, is in what's called a kill zone due to the large number of drones from both sides. So the battle for Pokrovsk at this point, I wouldn't say it's over. The Russians will definitely continue to reinforce this direction with a significant large number of troops. So Bild, to put it mildly, did not present the information quite accurately. In this case, of course, we should pay attention to the statements of our General Staff. If they say we're holding certain positions, then we definitely are holding them. For example, the General Staff isn't saying that we're holding Ovyar or Toretsk right now. Those were given up a long time ago, and quietly at that, back in the summer, allowing the Russians to advance further in that direction. But as for Pokrovsk, there are several positions there that we are holding firmly. Citadel as well. It's one of the heights of Pokrovsk. So once again, Belt has presented the information incorrectly at this time. But the information about Mirnohrad is actually accurate. Why? Because right now there is a problem specifically with our Mirnohrad garrison. We weren't able to push the Russians out of Rodinsky and Krasny Lyman, and that's the northwest of Mirnohrad. Right now, they're trying to break through from the direction of Krasny Lyman, from Rodinsky, straight toward Pokrovsk to the Pokrovsk railway station. And if they manage to do that, they'll cut off our garrison in Mirnohrad. And that's very important. It's crucial to understand this clearly. That's why for us right now, for the officers of the operational level, we need to make the right decisions in this situation, either to unblock this direction, meaning to carry out another operation to clear Rodinsky and Krasny Lyman again, or to withdraw our garrison from Mirnohrad. Otherwise, it will simply be too late and the guys will end up surrounded. But for now, we still have an opportunity. Once again, let me repeat, this has happened more than once already. There is a threat to Mirnohrad, and it was usually resolved after the General Staff intervened. By using their reserves, which they redirected to clear out this Russian pincer stretching from Krasny Lyman to Pokrovsk, cutting off the Mirnohrad direction. So, well, what can I say? In this sense, yes, perhaps Bit is somewhat right, but that doesn't mean it's a final outcome, so to speak, because there are still opportunities to resolve the situation around Mirnohrad. But there are no such opportunities for Toretsk or Chasiv Yar. There really aren't, and the reason is that the Russians have completely pushed us out from there.
The General Staff has officially denied Bild's information about the alleged complete capture of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian forces continue to hold the northern part of the city along the railway line. Our units are actively working to eliminate enemy strongholds. Logistics are being restored in Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, according to General Staff Chairman Dmytro Lychovyi. And the latest information right now is that the situation in the Zaporizhzhia region, on the Zaporizhzhia front, is difficult. Roman Yegorievich, what can you say about the Zaporizhzhia region? It's very important. Everyone is talking about it now.
We've been talking about this with you for half a year. The main strategic objective for the Russians this year is to expand the land corridor. By capturing the Zaporizhzhia region and part of the Donetsk region, they've crawled all the way to Pokrovsk, practically expanding the land corridor, its eastern part, to almost 150 kilometers. And now they are continuing to carry out this strategic objective, expanding the land corridor by capturing the left bank part of the Zaporizhzhia region. Right now, they are trying to break through the western part of the Zaporizhzhia front in the area of Vasilivka and also Kamyanske. In other words, they are trying to move north towards Zaporizhzhia itself, directly along the line. You could say along what used to be the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir, that is the left bank, bypassing some of our positions from the west, specifically in this direction. They are trying to advance toward Orikhiv, but are encountering serious resistance there. We have strong positions there, as well as in Huliapol to the south. But there is a problem near Huliapol. The Russians are coming in from the north. Moreover, this problem is only going to get worse now because the Russians still have a few weeks before the operational pause that I think Putin will be pushing for, trying to force it by the end of this month, by the end of the year, as a sort of under the Christmas tree move. In other words, he will now try to burn through all reserves, capturing most of the Zaporizhzhia region, at least part of the reserves. Right now, our partisans are observing movements leaving Donetsk towards Volnovaka in the direction of Novotroitske, further on towards Velika Novosilka, and then on to Pokrovsk. The settlement of Pokrovsk, not Pokrovsk, but Pokrovsk, that's just north of Huliapol. We've been talking about it with you for several weeks, even several months, because this will be the main direction for the Russians, leading to the highway to Zaporizhzhia and moving along this highway, the so-called Ark Road, in order to cut off both the Huliapol and Orikhiv garrisons and to approach Zaporizhzhia from the northeast. This is a big problem for us because there are already several tens of thousands there. Right now, these Russian reserves, which will be moving from under Donetsk towards Volnovakha, will then head exactly in the Zaporizhzhia direction, passing through Velika Novosilka. We need to keep track of them. We must not allow them to get there. Otherwise, we could really lose part of Zaporizhzhia region. And this is a problem right now. It will be developing over the next few weeks, and then Putin will try to move to an operational pause closer to the new year. That is, once again, under the convenient and widely celebrated pretext of the upcoming Christmas holidays and so on, he will undoubtedly try to firmly dig in and establish a stronger presence on those recently captured and occupied lands, which they are trying to seize it just a few weeks before the new year. By the way, here we'll need to understand how our responses will be, how the Israeli authorities will act on this issue. Because Putin needs an operational pause. He needs to regroup, to bring up reserves, because he's already pushed in quite deep. And so we need to understand how they will do this. It will be interesting to see how they articulate it. That is, either they will present it as their great victory, that they stopped Putin, even though he actually needs an operational pause, or they will somehow bend under the pressure from Putin or from Trump himself. We can see what this leads to, but in no case should Kudenov be given an operational pause, especially if he brings up reserves. Next year, we will lose the Zaporizhzhia region, the left bank, and that's definitely not even considering a further invasion yet. Most of the Dnipropetrovsk region as well, moving from Pokrovsk towards Dobropilia and Krasna Armia, Pokrovsk and Slovyansk. Dear
viewers, please like this video and share your thoughts about the overall situation in the comments. Together with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitar, we go live 3 times a week on my YouTube channel. Roman Grigorievich, thank you for your professional analysis and see you again this Friday as usual.
Goodbye.